The sun rose slowly over the rolling hills of the Apache reservation, spilling soft golden light across the dusty plains. Birds sang quietly among the trees, and the air was crisp and calm. In the small village, people were already stirring. Women carried water from the river. Children ran along narrow paths, and the elders sat outside their huts watching the morning unfold with quiet interest. Today was not an ordinary day. Today there was a ceremony, a day when warriors would show their courage, strength, and skill, hoping to win the hand of the young Apache girl who had grown into a strong and thoughtful young woman. She was the daughter of a respected family in the village. People admired her not only for her beauty, but for her intelligence, her kindness, and her spirit. She moved through the village with a quiet confidence, greeting everyone with a smile. Yet her eyes carried a sharpness that showed she was aware of everything happening around her. Children ran to her, elders nodded in respect, and even the strongest warriors who had come to compete could not ignore the quiet power she carried in her presence. In the distance, the dust of approaching horses stirred the morning air. 12 warriors, each from different parts of the region, were arriving. They had traveled long distances to take part in the ceremony. Each man was known for his bravery. Some were fast riders, others were strong with weapons, and a few were clever with their minds. All of them hoped to impress her, to prove that they were the best among the many suitors. Their horses neighed and stamped impatiently, eager to be untethered from the long ride. The villagers gathered near the ceremonial circle, excitement building. The children whispered to each other, imagining the stories they would tell their friends about the great warriors. The elders, wise for many years, watched carefully, noting not only the warriors' skill but their behavior, knowing that true character often revealed itself in quiet moments as much as in grand displays. Then, a lone figure appeared on the horizon, riding a horse of chestnut brown. Unlike the 12 warriors, he did not arrive with fanfare or display. His hat was simple, his clothes plain, and his horse moved at an easy pace, steady and calm. He seemed almost out of place among the proud and boastful men who were gathering to show their strength. The villagers whispered to each other, curious about this cowboy who had arrived alone. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why had he come to a ceremony filled with warriors known far and wide for their bravery? The girl watched him too. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in his quiet demeanor. There was no arrogance in the way he held himself. He did not shout or boast. He did not try to impress the people or the elders with displays of skill. Yet there was something different about him, something calm and steady that drew attention without demanding it. She could not yet understand it, but something told her that this man, quiet and unassuming, would play a part in today's events that no one expected. The 12 warriors began preparing for the challenges ahead. They sharpened their weapons, flexed their muscles, and whispered among themselves. Some looked at the cowboy with curiosity, others with suspicion. He did not join their conversations. He tied his horse near the edge of the circle and simply watched, taking in the surroundings, observing the people and the movements of the other warriors. He had a steady gaze and a thoughtful look, and though he said nothing, he did not seem nervous or uncertain. The villagers began to feel a sense of intrigue about him. As the morning grew warmer, the ceremony officially began. Drums sounded echoing across the hills, and a hush fell over the crowd. The girl stepped forward, wearing a simple but elegant dress decorated with traditional patterns. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she held herself with dignity. The elders introduced the 12 warriors one by one, telling the crowd of their deeds and the places they had come from. The applause for each warrior was loud, and the air buzzed with excitement. Yet each time the girl's eyes drifted to the lone cowboy, she felt a quiet interest stir inside her. The first challenge was a test of skill with the bow and arrow. The warriors lined up, aiming at targets set at different distances. Some arrows struck the marks perfectly while others missed. The crowd cheered for the successful shots and murmured at the mistakes. The lone cowboy did not rush to take his turn. He watched carefully, studying the way the others handled their bows. When it was finally his turn, he stepped forward with calm precision. He drew his bow, aimed, and released an arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the center of the target. He did not celebrate or boast. He simply nodded respectfully and stepped back, letting the next warrior take his turn. The crowd murmured in surprise. There was no showmanship, yet his skill was undeniable. Next came the challenge of endurance. The warriors were asked to run across rough terrain, climb steep hills, and carry heavy loads. One by one they struggled, some faltering, some pushing through with determination. The cowboy again did not rush. He began with measured steps, pacing himself, observing the terrain and adjusting his movements carefully. Others raced ahead, some stumbling or tiring quickly. The cowboy moved steadily, carefully, never overexerting but never stopping either. By the time he reached the finish, he was neither the fastest nor the slowest. Yet people began to notice something important. Not speed alone mattered. His steady persistence and careful attention to the path he took reflected a quiet strength that many overlooked in their rush to display power. As the morning passed into afternoon, the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the circle. The warriors prepared for more tests: intelligence, strategy, and problem-solving. Each challenge revealed more about their character. Some grew frustrated quickly, showing anger or impatience. Others showed pride or arrogance, seeking admiration from the crowd. The cowboy, however, faced each challenge with patience. He thought carefully, acted deliberately, and solved problems in ways that surprised both the elders and the girl. His solutions were not flashy, but they were clever and practical. The girl found herself noticing not only what he could do, but how he handled himself. Calmly, with integrity and respect for the rules and for others. By the time the first half of the day ended, the villagers had grown quiet with anticipation. They whispered among themselves about the 12 warriors, who seemed strong and impressive, yet they also spoke quietly about the lone cowboy. There was something different about him, something that could not be measured by strength, skill, or speed alone. The girl felt her curiosity growing. She wondered who he was and why he had come. He had not shouted, he had not demanded attention, yet he had already stood out in ways that were not easy to define. As the afternoon sun began to sink, a gentle breeze moved through the village, rustling the leaves of the trees and carrying the smell of the earth and the river. The girl took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Today would not only test the warriors but also her own judgment. She had watched the strength and courage of many men, but she knew that her decision would not be based solely on who was fastest, strongest, or most celebrated. She needed to see who possessed true character, wisdom, and kindness. The lone cowboy remained quiet at the edge of the circle, observing the unfolding events. He did not seek approval, nor did he try to impress anyone, yet in his eyes was a calm awareness, a quiet understanding of the challenges ahead. He was ready for whatever came next, but he would not let pride or arrogance guide his actions. The girl watched him closely, feeling an unspoken connection, a sense that he was different from the others in ways that mattered more than the obvious feats of strength or skill. As the day moved toward its most important moments, the villagers, the warriors, and the girl herself knew that something important was beginning to take shape. It was not only a contest of physical strength, but a test of character, patience, and heart. The 12 warriors were prepared to show everything they had, hoping to win her hand, but the girl could not shake the quiet presence of the cowboy who stood apart. She felt that in the days to come he might surprise everyone in ways no one could yet imagine. The morning had ended, but the story was only beginning. The village waited, hearts full of curiosity and excitement as the challenges and decisions of the day continued to unfold. And in the midst of it all, the lone cowboy quietly prepared himself, unaware of how important he was already becoming. Not through boasting, not through pride, but simply by being calm, thoughtful, and true to himself. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains as the challenges continued. The villagers had gathered around the ceremonial circle, their eyes bright with anticipation. Children perched on rocks or clung to their parents' skirts, eager to see which warrior would prove himself worthy of the Apache girl's hand. The elders, seated near the center, watched quietly, their expressions calm but knowing, for they had seen such competitions many times before. Today, however, felt different. The presence of the lone cowboy had changed the air. There was something about him, steady, quiet, yet impossible to ignore. The next round of challenges began, focusing on strength and skill. The warriors were asked to carry heavy bundles of firewood across uneven terrain, leap over wide gaps, and climb rough hillsides. One by one, they stepped forward, muscles flexing, faces determined. Some moved with grace, others with raw power, but all struggled against the sun and the weight of their loads. The villagers cheered for the daring feats, impressed by the strength on display. The girl watched carefully, noting each man's effort, but her attention kept returning to the cowboy, who still remained calm at the edge of the circle. When it was finally his turn, he did not rush. He tied his horse to a nearby post and approached the challenges with quiet confidence. He picked up his first bundle of wood, heavier than many had expected, and balanced it carefully on his shoulder. Instead of running or charging ahead, he moved steadily, one step at a time. His movements were precise and controlled, and though he carried no showy strength, his pace never faltered. Children whispered among themselves, amazed at how a man so quiet could appear so strong. The girl's eyes widened slightly. She could see that his strength was not just in his muscles, but in his patience and determination, qualities often overlooked in competitions. The next test was agility. Warriors had to navigate a course filled with obstacles, logs, rocks, and low-hanging branches. Many stumbled, tripped, or lost their balance. Some became frustrated, their pride making them hurry, which only caused mistakes. The cowboy approached the course without haste. He observed the obstacles carefully, noted the best paths, and moved with smooth, deliberate steps. He leapt over logs and ducked under branches with grace, landing lightly each time. The villagers murmured in admiration. The girl smiled faintly, realizing that true skill was not always loud or aggressive. The cowboy's quiet confidence and careful attention impressed her far more than the showy attempts of others. As the challenges progressed, the sun climbed higher, bringing heat that made the dusty earth shimmer. Sweat glistened on the foreheads of the warriors, some wiping it away, others pushing through, determined not to show weakness. The girl noticed how quickly pride and anger could take over, making men careless. The cowboy, however, remained composed. He took short rests, drank water when needed, and even offered a kind word to a younger warrior who stumbled, helping him regain balance without drawing attention to himself. The girl's heart began to notice something deeper than strength, an understanding, a care for others, and a quiet courage that spoke louder than any shout or display. By mid-afternoon, the villagers were buzzing with excitement. They had watched strength, agility, and intelligence, but now a new dimension of character was emerging, one that could not be measured in speed or skill alone. The girl's thoughts turned inward. She wondered which qualities truly mattered in a partner. Was it the loud displays of power, or was it the calm confidence and thoughtful action of someone who acted with integrity? Each warrior had shown skill, yet the cowboy's presence, quiet and steady, left an impression she could not ignore. Suddenly, a shout rang out from the edge of the circle. A wild animal, startled by the noise and activity, had wandered too close to the villagers. Its sharp eyes glinted in the sunlight, and it growled softly, unaware of the people around it. Panic spread quickly. Children cried, women pulled them close, and the warriors tensed, unsure of the right action. Some reached for weapons, others tried to scare the animal away, but their efforts only seemed to agitate it further. The girl's heart pounded, fear mixed with concern as she watched the scene unfold. Without hesitation, the cowboy stepped forward. He did not shout, nor did he brandish a weapon. Instead, he moved calmly, keeping his hands visible, speaking softly in a low voice. He understood the animal's behavior and recognized that aggression would only make it dangerous. Slowly, he guided it away from the villagers, moving with a steady and measured pace. The crowd watched in amazement. The 12 warriors, despite all their strength and skill, had been unable to act with such calm precision. One by one, they stepped back, unsure how to proceed, while the cowboy's quiet courage took control of the situation. When the animal had been safely led away, the villagers cheered softly, their relief palpable. The girl's eyes met the cowboy's, and she saw a quiet humility in his gaze. He had acted not to show off, not to impress anyone, but to protect others. That single moment spoke volumes about his character. The warriors, on the other hand, looked at each other in surprise. They had relied on skill and pride, yet it had been the quiet man who acted with true wisdom and courage. The girl's admiration grew, and a small smile touched her lips. She felt that courage could take many forms, and the cowboy had shown a kind that was rare and valuable. As the afternoon wore on, the next challenge was introduced: problem solving. Warriors were given a puzzle, a test of intelligence and strategy, requiring careful thought and teamwork. Some attempted to rush through, relying on guesswork or brute force, and they failed. Others argued among themselves, letting frustration cloud their judgment. The cowboy approached calmly, studying the problem carefully before acting. He asked questions quietly, considered the possible solutions, and acted with patience. One by one, he placed pieces together, and the puzzle fell into place with ease. The crowd watched in silence, realizing that cleverness and patience could triumph where pride and force often failed. The girl's eyes sparkled. Here was a man who thought, observed, and acted with care, a rare combination of intelligence and humility. By late afternoon, the villagers had witnessed many feats of strength, agility, and wisdom. The 12 warriors had tried to impress her with power, speed, and skill. But it was clear that the cowboy had gained something deeper: attention and respect through calm courage, patience, and care for others. The girl reflected on what she had seen. True strength, she realized, was not always loud or flashy. It could be quiet, steady, and full of thoughtfulness. The cowboy had not only survived the challenges, but had impressed her in ways the warriors could not. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. The villagers gathered closer, sensing that the day's most important moments were approaching. Conversations softened, and even the warriors became more aware of the man who had quietly stood apart. He had shown skill without boasting, courage without aggression, and wisdom without pride. Children pointed at him, whispering to each other about the quiet cowboy who seemed different from all the others. The elders nodded subtly, recognizing the significance of his actions, and the girl, standing tall with her heart racing, felt a connection that was not based on displays of power but on character, integrity, and quiet strength. As evening approached, a gentle wind stirred the dust and carried the smell of the river. The cowboy stood at the edge of the circle, calm and steady as ever. The girl watched him, knowing that the events of the day were only the beginning. The challenges had shown her the nature of the warriors, but the cowboy had revealed something far more important: an understanding of what truly mattered in a partner, someone who could act with courage, thoughtfulness, and care, even in the most unexpected situations. The villagers prepared for the final moments of the day, knowing that decisions would soon be made. The warriors adjusted their clothing, tightened their belts, and prepared to demonstrate their last abilities. But the girl's thoughts remained on the cowboy who had acted without show, who had guided a wild animal safely away, who had solved puzzles with quiet intelligence, and who had never sought admiration. In her heart, she knew that the story of this day would be remembered not only for feats of strength, but for the character that had quietly shone through in unexpected ways. As the sun set, painting the sky in deep reds and purples, the girl felt anticipation grow. Tomorrow would bring more challenges and choices, but already the quiet cowboy had left a mark on her heart and on the village. He had shown that bravery could be gentle, that intelligence could be humble, and that true strength often lay in patience, care, and quiet courage. The story of the day was far from over, but one truth had already become clear. Sometimes the one who stands alone and says little can prove more than the loudest among the crowd. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, soft shadows across the dusty plains. The village was alive with whispers and quiet excitement. The villagers, young and old, had spent the entire day watching the 12 warriors compete in strength, skill, and intelligence. Each man had shown courage, but there was something about the lone cowboy who had captured the attention of everyone. He had acted with patience, with quiet wisdom, and with care for others. Now, as the next round of challenges approached, the air was thick with anticipation. The challenge this time was not just about physical skill or cleverness. It was a test of courage and heart. The warriors were asked to cross a narrow ridge overlooking a steep canyon, a path that required balance, focus, and bravery. Any misstep could lead to injury. Many of the warriors flexed their muscles, ready to charge forward with confidence, while others hesitated, eyes wide with fear. The villagers held their breath, knowing that courage alone would not be enough. This was a test of mental strength as well. The first warrior stepped onto the ridge, his boot slipping slightly on the loose stones. He moved quickly at first, but the steep drop on either side caused him to falter. Sweat ran down his face as he tried to maintain his balance. The villagers murmured nervously, worried for him, while the girl's eyes remained calm but watchful. One by one, the other warriors attempted the crossing. Some made it halfway and froze in fear. Others completed it but looked tense and proud, their confidence hiding the trembling in their hands. When it was the cowboy's turn, he approached the ridge slowly, deliberately, not rushing. He took a deep breath, feeling the wind that whispered across the canyon, and then stepped forward. Each movement was measured and careful, He placed his feet deliberately on the stones, feeling the stability before moving again. Unlike some of the warriors who relied on sheer strength, he relied on balance and observation. He paused where the stones seemed unstable, adjusting his stance carefully. The villagers watched in silence, captivated by the calm determination he displayed. The girl's heart beat a little faster as she followed each step, realizing that courage was not always about rushing forward. It could also be about knowing one's limits and moving carefully with confidence. Halfway across, the ridge became narrower, and a gust of wind threatened to throw off anyone unprepared. One warrior stumbled, letting out a startled shout, and the villagers gasped. The cowboy, however, stayed steady. He felt the wind on his face, leaned slightly, and adjusted his balance without panic. The girl watched him intently. She realized that bravery was not about fearlessness. It was about acting with calmness in the face of danger. The cowboy's quiet courage spoke louder than the loudest shouts of the other warriors. When he reached the other side, he turned and offered a small nod to the girl, acknowledging her presence without boasting. The villagers clapped softly, impressed not by a show of force but by the careful confidence he had displayed. The girl's eyes reflected a growing admiration. In him, she saw strength of character, courage tempered with thoughtfulness, and a calm that could not be taught. It was the kind of bravery that quietly inspired trust, the kind of bravery that mattered in real life, not just in competitions. The next challenge was a test of teamwork. The warriors were paired to carry a large wooden beam across a set of uneven logs, requiring coordination, patience, and cooperation. Many of the 12 warriors struggled. They argued over how to lift the beam, shouted instructions at each other, and tried to push through without listening. Their pride and desire to win clouded their judgment. The cowboy, however, did not argue. He approached another quiet participant, a young warrior who had not yet shown much skill, and together they lifted the beam. He adjusted the weight, offered guidance in a soft voice, and moved carefully so neither stumbled. Step by step they crossed the logs, completing the task with quiet precision. The girl's admiration deepened. She noticed that while others focused only on themselves, the cowboy helped others succeed, showing both strength and humility. After the teamwork challenge, the villagers were called to witness a display of character. The elders explained that the final test of the day would not involve strength or skill, but kindness, judgment, and integrity. The warriors were given a set of scenarios to resolve, situations that required thoughtful decision-making rather than physical ability. Some warriors approached these challenges arrogantly, assuming that quick answers would impress. Others hesitated, unsure how to act. The cowboy, however, took his time. He listened to the details, considered the people involved, and made choices that were fair, wise, and compassionate. In every scenario, he balanced courage with thoughtfulness, ensuring that no one was harmed and that justice was served. The villagers whispered among themselves, realizing that intelligence alone could not measure a man. Character, courage, and care were equally important. As the sun dipped lower, a soft glow settled over the village. The crowd had watched a day filled with tests, excitement, and surprises. Children were tired but restless, sharing stories of the warriors' feats. The elders exchanged nods, knowing that their judgment would soon be required. And the girl, standing tall yet thoughtful, reflected on what she had seen. She realized that her choice would not be based on pride, loudness, or flashy skills. She needed a man who could act with courage, kindness, and patience. She thought about each warrior in turn, the strongest, the fastest, the cleverest. But her mind kept returning to the quiet cowboy who had stood apart, not for display but for character. Then, as if the day had not already tested them enough, a new challenge arose. A young child playing near the edge of the village tripped and fell, twisting his ankle. A wave of concern rippled through the crowd. Several warriors rushed forward, some pushing through the people, others shouting for space. The cowboy, however, stepped carefully through the crowd, moving calmly and deliberately. He knelt beside the child, assessing the injury without panic. He spoke softly to calm the child, lifted him gently, and guided him back to the village center. The girl watched him closely, her heart swelling. This was the moment that mattered. Courage was not only about facing danger, it was about protecting others when they were vulnerable. The cowboy's quiet action had revealed a strength that words or feats could never measure. By the time evening settled over the plains, the villagers had witnessed much more than skill or speed. They had seen patience, intelligence, kindness, and courage in action. The 12 warriors had fought fiercely, hoping to impress, but it was the cowboy who had captured attention through quiet acts, thoughtful decisions, and calm bravery. The girl's admiration had grown steadily, though she had not yet spoken. She felt a pull toward him, not because he had shown off, but because he had been himself, genuine, thoughtful, and brave in ways that mattered most. As the sun finally set, painting the sky in deep shades of red and gold, the village began to settle for the evening. Fires were lit, casting a warm glow across the circle. Children played quietly, and the elders spoke in low tones, recounting the day's events. The warriors gathered, some laughing nervously, others deep in thought, realizing that today had shown them more than they expected. And the cowboy, who had never sought praise or attention, stood quietly at the edge, observing the faces of the villagers, the warriors, and especially the girl. The girl's gaze met his, and for a moment words were unnecessary. She had seen courage, patience, kindness, and wisdom, and she recognized that these qualities were rare. The cowboy had not shouted, boasted, or demanded admiration. He had simply acted with heart and integrity, and in doing so he had revealed the strength of his character. The villagers too recognized it, even if they could not fully explain why they were drawn to him. Something had shifted in the way they looked at the day, at the warriors, and at the possibilities that lay ahead. That evening, as stars began to appear in the sky, the girl walked quietly through the village, thinking about the day's events. The challenges had tested skill, strength, and intelligence, but they had also revealed character. She reflected on the lone cowboy who had acted without show, guided a frightened child safely, solved problems with patience, and crossed dangerous paths with steady courage. She realized that bravery was not just about strength. It was about heart, understanding, and calmness in the face of challenges. The villagers returned to their homes, some talking quietly about what they had witnessed, others sitting in silence, contemplating the lessons of the day. The 12 warriors gathered their belongings, some confident, some uncertain, aware that the quiet cowboy had already made an impression that might surpass all their efforts. And the cowboy, who had remained humble and true throughout, simply prepared for the next day, ready to face whatever challenges came, unaware that he had already begun to leave a mark on the hearts of many. The evening had settled over the village, turning the sky into a canvas of deep orange and soft purple. Fires flickered in front of the huts, casting long, dancing shadows across the dusty ground. The villagers were gathering in the ceremonial circle once more, ready to witness the final challenges before the girl made her choice. Children sat wide-eyed near the edges, and the elders leaned forward, knowing that the day was almost over and that moments of truth were about to unfold. The 12 warriors were restless, adjusting their clothes and weapons, preparing to make one last display of strength, skill, and courage. The cowboy, however, remained calm, standing quietly at the edge of the circle, observing everything with thoughtful eyes. The girl stood at the center, her posture straight and dignified. Her heart had been busy throughout the day, watching not only the feats of the warriors but also the quiet actions of the cowboy who had captured her attention. She knew that her decision would not be based on who was the fastest or the strongest, but on character, patience, and kindness. The villagers had also begun to notice this quiet man who had acted with courage without seeking praise. Their whispers filled the air with a mix of admiration and curiosity, for his presence had changed the feeling of the day. The first final challenge was one of endurance and precision. Warriors were asked to climb the tallest hill near the village and retrieve a flag that had been placed at the top. The path was steep, filled with loose rocks and narrow ledges demanding both strength and careful attention. The 12 warriors rushed forward, muscles straining, determined to impress. Some stumbled, lost footing on the uneven stones, or grew frustrated with the difficulty. Shouts and grunts echoed across the hills as men tried to push through with force alone. The cowboy approached differently. He paused at the base of the hill, studying the path carefully. He noticed unstable rocks, loose soil, and tricky turns. He moved with quiet determination, taking one careful step at a time. Where others had rushed and stumbled, he advanced with patience. The villagers watched in silence, captivated by his calm and steady approach. The girl felt a flutter of admiration in her chest. She realized that courage was not always about speed or loud action. It was about understanding the situation, moving wisely and never losing control. Halfway up the hill, a sudden gust of wind shook the tall grasses and threatened to knock a few warriors off balance. One warrior slipped slightly, his hands scrabbling for purchase. Another shouted in frustration. The cowboy, however, leaned into the wind, shifted his weight carefully, and continued steadily. His movements were smooth and deliberate, each step measured. When he reached the top, he quietly lifted the flag, holding it high for the villagers to see. There was no boastful gesture, no triumphant shout, only a calm nod and a deep sense of satisfaction in completing the task correctly. The girl's eyes shone with admiration. In him she saw courage that was thoughtful and real, not flashy or performative. The next test required emotional intelligence and quick thinking. A small group of villagers had created scenarios to test how the warriors would act under pressure, whether they could think of others before themselves, and how they handled unexpected situations. One scenario involved helping a frightened child find her way home through the village, while navigating obstacles and avoiding hazards. Several warriors attempted it, but their focus was on completing the task quickly, not on caring for the child's feelings or safety. They rushed, became frustrated, or barked orders at others, showing impatience rather than understanding. The cowboy approached the scenario with calm attention. He knelt to speak softly to the child, holding her hand and reassuring her. Step by step, he guided her through the path, alert to every stone, every loose log, and every distraction. He never rushed, never showed impatience. Instead, he acted with care, making sure the child felt safe and understood. The villagers noticed, and the elders exchanged quiet smiles. The girl's heart swelled with admiration. Here was a man who could think of others before himself, who could act with calm intelligence in a moment that demanded not force but heart. After this challenge, the atmosphere grew quieter, almost reverent. The villagers could sense that the day's trials had revealed more than skill. They had shown character. The warriors, despite their efforts, had often acted for display, to impress or dominate. The cowboy had acted for purpose, for understanding, and for protection of others. The girl reflected on everything she had witnessed. She realized that the man she admired was not the one who shouted the loudest or moved the fastest, but the one who had shown courage, patience, and integrity in moments when it mattered most. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the circle, the final part of the ceremony began. The elders called for a quiet moment, asking the warriors to stand at the edge of the circle and wait. The girl walked slowly to the center, the villagers' eyes following her every movement. The wind carried the faint sound of the river, the smell of earth and grass, and the soft whispers of the crowd. She paused, looking at each warrior in turn. Her gaze lingered on the cowboy. He stood a little apart, calm and humble, yet his presence seemed to command attention without effort. The moment stretched, full of tension, anticipation, and quiet wonder. Finally, the girl spoke. She described the qualities she sought: courage that was patient, strength that was wise, intelligence that was tempered with kindness, and a heart that cared for others. She praised each warrior for their efforts, for the skill and bravery they had displayed, and for the commitment they had shown. But as she spoke, her eyes returned repeatedly to the cowboy. She remembered the calm way he had crossed the ridge, the careful manner in which he had guided a child, the quiet courage he had shown in every task. Her heart knew what her words had not yet expressed. She realized that true partnership required not only strength and skill, but thoughtfulness, integrity, and kindness, qualities that the cowboy embodied naturally. The villagers watched in quiet anticipation as she turned slowly toward him. The 12 warriors held their breath, some surprised, some uncertain, and some proud, thinking they still had a chance. The girl's hand lifted, pointing clearly and confidently at the cowboy. A hush fell over the circle. The cowboy's eyes widened slightly, and he took a small, humble step forward, his horse resting quietly nearby. The crowd gasped softly, amazed at her choice. They had witnessed many feats, but none had touched the heart as he had. The elders nodded in approval, recognizing the wisdom in her decision. The children clapped quietly, sensing the quiet strength in the moment. The 12 warriors looked on, some smiling, some thoughtful, realizing that victory was not only in feats of power or skill, but in character and heart. The cowboy stood before the girl, feeling a mixture of honor, humility, and quiet surprise. He had never sought recognition, yet here he was, chosen not for the loudest display, but for the steady courage he had shown throughout the day. The girl's gaze met his, full of warmth, admiration, and understanding. She spoke softly, thanking him for his patience, his courage, and his respect for others. In that moment, words were not enough to capture the depth of feelings growing between them. The villagers, too, felt the significance of the moment. This was not merely the conclusion of a ceremony. It was the celebration of values, wisdom, courage, kindness, and integrity, qualities that would guide the next chapter of their lives. As the fires flickered and the sky darkened into deep purple, the cowboy and the girl walked slowly toward each other. He extended his hand and she took it, not in a gesture of power or submission, but in one of partnership and mutual respect. The villagers cheered quietly, knowing they had witnessed a rare and beautiful moment. The 12 warriors approached, offering respectful nods and congratulations. There was no jealousy, no anger, only acknowledgement that true worth is measured not in displays but in quiet, steady acts of courage and kindness. The night settled fully over the village, stars sparkling above like tiny flames. The girl and the cowboy stood together at the center of the circle, holding hands and looking around at the community that had gathered. They spoke softly to each other, sharing small stories of the day, of their lives, and of the moments that had mattered most. There was laughter, gentle smiles, and a sense of connection that went deeper than words. The villagers, watching from nearby, felt the warmth of the moment settle over them, knowing that the union formed here was built on respect, courage, and care. The cowboy's horse stood quietly nearby, patient and loyal. The girl's heart was full, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the fires. Together they had witnessed the importance of patience, courage, and character. The story of the day would be remembered for generations, not for the loud displays of skill or strength, but for the quiet heroism and integrity that had shone through in the cowboy who had stood apart. As the village settled into the night, conversations softened to whispers and the children drifted. The morning arrived calm and bright, with sunlight spilling over the hills and warming the village. The events of the previous day had left a quiet excitement in the air. Villagers were preparing for a small celebration to honor the girl's choice, and to recognize the courage, patience, and integrity of the lone cowboy who had earned her admiration. Smoke from fires drifted lazily into the sky, carrying the scent of cooked bread and roasted meat, and children ran between huts eager to greet the day. Even the elders moved with quiet anticipation, knowing that this day would mark the beginning of something important, not only for the girl and the cowboy, but for the community as a whole. The 12 warriors, who had competed fiercely the previous day, gathered together at the edge of the village. They were quiet this morning, reflecting on the lessons they had learned. Some nodded respectfully toward the cowboy, recognizing the strength of his character. Others exchanged thoughtful glances, realizing that the loudest or strongest among them had not always shown the kind of courage that mattered most. The girl had made her choice, and now the warriors were ready to accept it gracefully. Understanding that character and heart often outweighed skill or speed in the long run, the cowboy stood near the center of the circle, calm as ever. His hat shaded his face from the morning sun, and his hands rested easily at his sides. He had never sought attention, and yet now he found himself at the center of admiration and respect. The girl approached him, walking with quiet confidence, her eyes bright with emotion. The villagers watched closely, sensing the significance of the moment. They had seen her consideration, her thoughtfulness, and her attention to every act of courage and kindness. Now she was ready to honor the man who had earned her respect and admiration. When she reached him, the girl extended her hand. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying across the circle, "for showing courage, kindness, and patience. You have earned my respect and my trust." The cowboy took her hand carefully, his expression a mix of humility and quiet joy. "It is an honor," he replied simply. "I did what I could, and it means more than I can say to know that it mattered." Their eyes met, and in that moment words were not needed. The villagers could see the bond forming between them, built on trust, respect, and shared understanding. The elders spoke next, their voices steady and warm. They praised the girl for her wisdom in recognizing true character, and they praised the cowboy for his courage, patience, and humility. They reminded everyone that the greatest strength is often quiet, and the greatest courage is shown not in shouting or display, but in thoughtful and kind action. The villagers listened, nodding and murmuring in agreement. Even the 12 warriors acknowledged these words, feeling a sense of respect for the man who had quietly stood apart yet shone the most important qualities of all. A gentle breeze carried the scent of the river through the village as preparations for a small celebration began. Tables were set with food and fires were stoked for warmth. Children gathered around, curious and eager to witness the union that had grown from courage and kindness. The girl and the cowboy walked slowly among the villagers, speaking softly and sharing smiles. They laughed quietly at the children's playful antics and nodded politely to the elders who offered blessings. Every step they took was filled with a sense of calm joy and mutual respect. Throughout the morning, the villagers told stories of the previous day's events. They recounted the challenges of strength and skill, the clever solutions to problems, and the quiet courage of the cowboy. Children listened intently, wide-eyed, imagining themselves one day showing the same bravery and thoughtfulness. The elders nodded approvingly, knowing that the lessons learned from this day would carry forward for generations. And the 12 warriors standing at the edges of the celebration acknowledged the truth that sometimes the quietest person holds the greatest power, the power of heart, character, and integrity. The girl and the cowboy found a quiet moment together near the riverbank. She looked at him with eyes full of admiration. "I watched how you acted yesterday," she said softly. "Not just in the challenges, but in the way you helped others and stayed calm under pressure. I knew then that you were different." The cowboy smiled gently. "I only did what seemed right," he said. "I did not think of winning or showing off. I just wanted to act with care and courage." She nodded, feeling a deep connection growing between them, understanding that true admiration is built on seeing the heart of another person. The villagers gathered near the ceremonial circle once more for a final blessing. The elders spoke words of encouragement, wishing the girl and the cowboy a life filled with courage, kindness, and mutual respect. The children watched in awe, understanding in some small way the importance of integrity and thoughtfulness. The 12 warriors stepped forward to offer their congratulations. Some shook hands with the cowboy, others nodded respectfully, and a few exchanged quiet words of wisdom. There was no jealousy or anger, only acknowledgement of the lessons learned and respect for the choices made. The celebration continued with music and laughter. Children danced around the fires and the villagers joined in, clapping and singing. The girl and the cowboy stood together smiling, sharing small jokes and gentle words. It was a moment of joy, a moment of recognition for courage, thoughtfulness, and the quiet power of character. The sun climbed higher in the sky, reflecting on the faces of those gathered, casting a warm glow over the village and highlighting the bonds of community and respect. Throughout the day, the girl and the cowboy continued to walk together, talking about small things and sharing simple stories. They spoke of hopes, of dreams, and of the lessons they had learned from the day's events. Every word they exchanged strengthened their understanding of each other, building a foundation of trust and admiration. The villagers noticed the deep connection growing between them, a connection based not on pride, display, or competition, but on shared values and mutual respect. As the evening approached, the celebration began to wind down. The fires burned low, casting a soft light across the circle. The girl and the cowboy stood hand in hand, looking out over the village. They had been through a day of challenges, observations, and quiet tests of character. They had seen the courage of others, the pride of the 12 warriors, and the admiration of the villagers. Yet it was their own shared respect and understanding that mattered most. They realized that life together would not always be easy, but it would be guided by courage, thoughtfulness, and care for one another. The stars began to appear in the sky, twinkling like tiny points of light above the village. The girl and the cowboy stood together, taking in the quiet beauty of the night. Children were settling down to sleep, and the elders sat nearby, sharing soft stories and reflections. Even the 12 warriors had retreated to their own tents, reflecting on the lessons of the day. All around there was a sense of peace, understanding, and satisfaction. The day had been long and full of challenges, but it had also shown the power of integrity, patience, and heart. The cowboy looked at the girl, his expression gentle. "I never imagined that a day like this could mean so much," he said softly. She smiled. "It is not only the day itself," she replied, "but the way we act, the choices we make, and the way we treat others. That is what matters most." They both understood that life was built not on the loudest voices or the fastest feet, but on steady courage, thoughtful actions, and kindness in every decision. As the night deepened, The village settled into quiet contentment. Fires flickered softly, casting warm shadows across the huts and pathways. The girl and the cowboy walked slowly back to her home, the villagers offering quiet smiles and nods of respect. Their journey together had just begun, but it was founded on principles that could guide them through any challenge. The stars above reflected the calm and steady light that had carried them through the day, a reminder that true courage often shines quietly, and that true admiration is earned, not demanded. Before finally resting, the girl and the cowboy paused near the edge of the village, looking out over the hills and the river that wound through the plains. "I think we have much to learn from each other," she said, her eyes reflecting the stars. "And much to share," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. In that simple gesture, they acknowledged the bond that had been built on courage, patience, and respect. It was a quiet promise, unspoken but understood, that they would face the future together side by side. The village slept peacefully under the starlit sky. Children dreamed of adventures. Elders reflected on wisdom, and even the 12 warriors rested, carrying the lessons of the day with them. And at the center of it all, the girl and the cowboy stood together, their hands joined, hearts connected, and eyes bright with hope.